Well, I'm Steve Younis from SupermanHomepage.com, talking to Michael Northrop, the author of Dear Justice League, the new graphic novel published by DC Comics under the DC Zoom label. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Now, I was happy to receive the copy of this graphic novel, which I love the idea about the story of the DC Comics superhero characters sharing letters and emails and messages from their fans and asking questions like, does Superman ever make mistakes? Does Wonder Woman listen to her parents? Does Aquaman smell like fish? Like, these are great questions from fans. Firstly, before we get into the graphic novel, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and the things you've been working on? Because I believe this is your first graphic novel.
Yes. Yeah. So, this is my first graphic novel. I've written a lot of books for young readers. It's my first graphic novel, but it's my 13th book for kids or teens. The first 12 were all with Scholastic. Started out doing mostly young adult novels, and then sort of like transitioned younger to mostly middle grade recently. So, a lot of experience writing for this age group, but yeah, definitely a first for me with the graphic novel. And before that, I worked at a magazine here in the U.S., Sports Illustrated Kids, yeah, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a sports magazine for young readers. So that was really how I sort of transitioned into writing for young readers.
Okay, fantastic. So, being a graphic novel, it's obviously a visual medium, and the artwork in the graphic novel is fantastic. Gustavo Duarte, awesome. Just the style of the characters, it is amazing. Yeah. So what was the process like working with him? What was the collaboration like? How did that process all work?
It was fascinating. I mean, the thing about Gustavo and I, which I can say now, having, finished this book, gone through the whole process, and, starting another one, is that we really see eye to eye on these heroes. We have a lot of the same touchstones, the Super Friends, Challenge of the Super Friends cartoons, those like Richard Donner Superman movies, like, which are, sort of, kind of a sunnier kind of conception of some of these heroes, a little bit more kid-friendly from the start. And those were really big sort of early influences for us. And we have a very similar sense of humor, sort of physical sense of humor. But I didn't know any of that when I started. Like all I knew was like someone was going to draw these things. And so when I started out, like the early pages were very detailed in terms of expression, exactly what was in their head, very detailed in terms of positioning, the right leg up, the left leg straight, like that kind of stuff. And when I started getting these pages in from Gustavo and just saw him sort of making what my ideas visual, but also the humor, being on the same page with that, the expression sort of capturing the feel that I wanted, I started to really let go of that, and the pages became a lot more, sort of, giving him a little more room to operate, sure. And so it just like, so the physical description's less detailed, and the in terms of the expression, stuff like that, it was almost more shorthand. It was like, we could say like Batman being Batman here, because we both had this idea of like sort of a grumpy sort of like default setting for Batman. And so like, and things like that. And so it became a much more sort of easygoing process as I went on. This process of learning not only to trust him, to execute what I was thinking, but also to surprise me in little ways, like fun little ways, and that was half the fun, like getting these pages back. It was really exciting for two reasons. One was to see my thoughts sort of like made, visible on the page, but the other was to see his little spin, his sort of personality coming through. So it was this great mix of like having what I expected confirmed, but still being surprised. And so it was a process that, yeah, it was fun, but then B, it just got easier and looser as it went along, and I just trusted him more and more.
Cool. So just backtracking a little bit, how did you get involved with the Dear Justice League concept? Was it an idea that you pitched to DC Comics, or was it something that they approached you about? Why Michael Northrop specifically?
Yeah, I mean, they approached me about writing something for middle grade, just because, of the books I've done. I have a lot of experience reaching this age group specifically, and so they were interested to see if I had any ideas for them. And this was one of two ideas I came up with. I actually came up with like a million, like on a pad, just like all these ideas, like want to do like a Mon-El thing and all this, but like. But the two I sort of settled on were like a sort of like early origin thing with Aquaman. I thought, it's just like you could just make him that age, and then you've sort of got that, and then have like a very young Manta, Black Manta there, and then the other was Dear Justice League, and that came from that idea came from my time at Sports Illustrated Kids. Mm-hmm. So I interviewed a lot of pretty big sports stars, some like Michael Jordan, some superstars, and it was really interesting interviewing pro athletes because they're sort of known for not giving, they get asked the same questions over and over, so they give the same answers over and over.
Right.
A lot of sort of cliches. They take it one game at a time, this kind of thing. But one of the things we did, because we were a kids magazine, was ask them questions that had been sent in straight from kids. And the difference in the way that they answered those questions, as opposed to the questions from the reporters, was really, really eye-opening. They would, you could just see the defenses coming down. Even the body language, some would change a little bit. It's like, oh, wait, this next one comes from like a 10-year-old in Texas or something, and they're like, okay, you know what I mean? Like, It's not going to be a gotcha. Like, my answer isn't going to get me in trouble.
Yeah.
I can just, and it just struck me that maybe that same dynamic could work. These are larger than life figures, little guarded, little defensive, and that's what, superheroes are, plus it's identity, right? You know what I mean? So larger than life figures with big secrets. And so I just thought that same dynamic could work. And then it just became a question of finding the right questions. It's like if that question could get through the armor a little bit, like I wanted questions that would reveal something sort of essential about who that hero was, like as a person, or as a little something about their identity or something like that. So it was just this idea that kids could get to them, and then what would that show? So that was one of two ideas that have plenty of origin stories, so like, let's do that. And it just was a lot of fun. Now,
comic books these days are generally for an older audience. The writers have grown up with the books, and the characters have grown up, the readers have also grown up, and so it is important that we do reach a younger audience with these superhero stories. Was that a major point for you to have something out there that is for the younger reader, but still adult readers and fans could also be a part of?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I feel like I sort of like witnessed that happen with like, Dark Knight and like Wolverine miniseries and these things where it's just like the, sort of the rise of the anti-hero. And it was funny because it was happening simultaneously with like Super Friends and, really sort of campy conception of Batman on TV and stuff like that. But meanwhile, the comics themselves just going off in that direction. And, I think it was really exciting for people. Like, these can be really dark, complicated characters, and it's fun. But, I mean, I do feel like it's a little bit of a pendulum swing, right? Like, before that, comics were all for kids, and they were considered like sort of silly kids books, right? And then they started getting more, and now it's like you go into a comic book store, and yeah, it's pretty dark, almost exclusively for one little all ages rack, but almost exclusively for adults. So it like went from being all kids to all adults, and I really feel like, and that's over the course of my lifetime, that there can be space for both. There should be space for both. You know what I mean? Like, and like that's where comics came from is kids, and I feel like, it was really important, like for me to, help create something that was specifically for that age group, not like clean enough that they could read it if they really needed something on that character or something like that, but something that was really meant for them. But that said, I mean, we call them all ages comics, and I think Gustavo and I both took that seriously. We want kids to be able to enjoy it, adults to be able to enjoy it, and I mean, I think like an adult can read this book in a slightly different way. Aware of that it's a little bit of a retro thing, aware of the stuff that's happened in comics since. You know what I mean? And in that sense, the sort of like earnestness of it, the lack of like sort of cynicism or anything like that is definitely a very conscious choice. Like you could see this is like we love these characters. There's nothing dark about this book. There's nothing cynical about it. This is just a really kind of a love letter to these characters from Gustavo and I who've grown up with them. Since we're 4 or 5, we've known these characters. So. We knew them as kids. They were important to us as kids. And so it was important to us to create something that kids now could, that was meant specifically for kids now.
Nice. I was going to ask you, just looking at my questions, if you were a fan growing up of DC Comics characters. You've just kind of answered to that, and I can see you wearing a Superman t-shirt, which being the Superman homepage.
Alex Ross here, which is like maybe not the most kid friendly, right? But it's just one of those things about these characters, right? There are so many versions, and actually, it's interesting. Like the Alex Ross art is like it kind of reminds me a little bit of Gustavo in the way that just like it's like that iconic thing, like that essential Superman, is going for like the square jaw and but also that human, thing where just like little bit of flaws, like the little bit of, like it's, but yeah, I mean, but it's interesting with the DC characters because growing up, the Marvel characters I was reading in comic books, but DC I was reading in comic books, but also they're on the movie screens. They were on TV, and to the extent that the Marvel characters were not, at least initially. And so it's like I encountered them two ways, like that, like, Christopher Reeve's Superman, so influential for me as a kid, just the idea of what a superhero was, what I mean? Like, and honestly more Superman 2 probably than Superman 1, because you're dealing with that, the Neil Tazad reverse, what I mean? That like to see a superhero humbled, what I mean? Like is really, and then to see, obviously, good guy wins in the end. It's like, it was just like that to me was a superhero, right? And yeah, I mean, so it's like, yeah, the DC characters were a little more complicated because it's like they were on, Wonder Woman, Batman, both had been TV shows. Superman was on the movie screens, like Super Friends were on Saturday morning. So it's like the DC characters were, but then meanwhile they're also in the comics, and the comics are changing or have changed already with like Dark Knight, stuff like that. And so to have like a world, like my headspace as a kid where like they were still showing the old Adam West Batman, but then Dark Knight is happening, what I mean? That two so different conceptions of Batman in my same little brain, and so it's, I mean, it was different. I mean, I encountered the Marvel characters just through comics and the DC characters through comics and on screens, and
that's interesting because we come to this day and age where Marvel's characters are so prevalent on the movies.
Oh my god, yeah!
It's just like a lot of fans probably don't even exist on the comic books.
I know, right? It's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
given a golden age of movies. But so you've obviously grown up Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. Everybody knows those characters. The Flash. But in your book, you've got Jessica Cruz, you've got Green Lantern, Simon Baz. What was the choice
yeah.
behind choosing those lesser known characters?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's funny when you write a Justice League, right? Like some of it is non-negotiable, right? Like this has got to be, if you turn in a Justice League script without Superman, they just point at the door and tell you to get out, like, so it's like the core members, non-negotiable, you know who they're going to be, but a little at the margin, you can, like I wanted to have Hawkgirl because she just brought something different, like this sort of younger, energy to the team. And in fact, in the book, she's really kind of a really important connecting figure.
Yeah, linchpin.
Yeah, and she's not the biggest name, obviously. She's not the most famous hero, but she's a really important part of that team. And it's just because she brought us, that sort of like more friendlier, more youthful thing. Obviously Superman, serious, not like he's not, he's like a total buzzkill, but he's a serious guy, and he's just like very, yeah, exactly. And Batman and grumpy, stoic, like all of these things. Wonder Woman, again, very upright, right? But so then to have some younger energy there, it was just really important. And then, to pick like Simon Baz for the Green Lantern, and just to have a little bit of adjustments you could make, to the chemistry of the team. Because ultimately, I mean, it's divided into sections, but right, it's a team book. And so that's part of it. Part of it is like picking the mix of like personalities and ages and all of this stuff. And so it was fun to be able to, and then also, I was just talking about this with Gustavo. It's like once you pick the characters, now you have to decide what version of the character, because it's like the Aquaman, there have been so many Aquamans, so many Aquamen, but like, and now there's obviously in theaters and when he came up with sort of like this, to him, like classic essential Aquaman, who kind of has this like sailor on shore leave kind of vibe to him, like kind of needs a shave, like hair looks a little bit long, a little bit greasy, and I love that, and that was like fun, because like that choosing the characters happened early on, but like choosing what version and what sort of vibe of the character happened as we went along, and with the character sketches and all of that. And that was really fun too, to just like, okay, these are iconic characters, but there have been a lot of different interpretations of all of them. So which one are we going with? Are we sort of creating our own sort of composite? And I think the idea there was the same idea as with the questions. Is like the idea was just to like get at something essential about that hero. Like the seriousness of Batman, the earnestness of Superman, like what, and then our Flash is very much a prankster, and like that sort of thing. And so part of that was a balance, but also we just wanted to find the right version for this book.
Yeah. Now, it is broken up into chapters, as you say, and each one is pretty much focused on a particular character, but there is very much, and then what surprised me about the book was there's this nice through story that kind of goes, throughout the book, that ties it all together, that for me was just like, it was like an eye-opener, because I was just expecting it to be a letter to a character, a message to a character, and they're all kind of separate. But there's this whole, plot line that goes throughout it that just made it more joyful.
Yeah. I mean, to me, like, I'm sort of thinking of this book as a comic book, but we are going in between the panels. The stuff that normally would get cut off in the comic book. You're going from Superman scoping out, Metropolis looking for, the insectoids, to the next scene where they, the morning meeting, they have some information, but instead we don't cut away. Like we don't cut from big action point to big action point. We stay with him. So we stay with him. He doesn't spot anything. Something happens. You know what I mean? So the same thing, like Aquaman, he has that sort of showdown with Black Manta, and we don't cut away. You know, we don't go to the next big point. Like, we have him drying his hair with a towel in the, you know, which you would never see in the comic books, but it has to happen. You know what I mean? Like, so to me, it was still like a standard comic book. It was still a traditional comic book about something. In this case, this like battle with the insectoids. The difference was we didn't cut away, right? Like, we showed the stuff in between the big action scenes. But it was important for me to still have the big action scenes because I wanted to still recognizably be like a, you know, a superhero comic where they're saving the world. You know, just the difference was we just kept the camera on them basically in between the big scenes.
Now, I was happy to see at the back of the book that there is a follow-up to Dear Justice League called Dear Supervillains, which I think is a novel idea. It's just fantastic to see that other side of the coin. What can you tell us about this graphic novel, and when can fans expect to see it released?
Yeah, so that's going to come out fall 2020. So, you know, about a year from now.
Yep.
And it's going to be a lot of fun, but it's going to be different. I mean, the energy is going to be a little bit different. Just in that there was like a real positive, earnest positivity to Dear Justice League, you know. But Dear Supervillains, like, it's like, you know, talk about Super Friends again. Like, as a kid, my favorite scenes were always when the Hall of Doom would like rise from the swamp, you know, like, and it's like time the villains, you know, the music would change, the lighting would get, you know, like the colors would be blacks and grays and greens, and you just like I sit up a little bit more, right? Because there's this excitement when you're a kid, like this sense of like maybe a little danger, you know what I mean, like a little. It's kind of slightly forbidden, and I want to keep that. Like, so there are got to be people making bad decisions. These characters are got to be a little mean. But that said, it's to be a very safe walk on the wild side, right? Sure. Like kid friendly, you know, like crime does not pay, you know, like the bad guys do not, you know, like, you know, they make bad decisions and bad decisions have consequences. You know, they have like, they're selfish and that has you know, things like that. And so it's got to be like safe, it's got to be kid friendly, but I really want to preserve that little electricity that you get with the villains, that little sense of like danger or like whatever you want to call it, like, you know, like, and so we you know, it's got to be a little bit different, just feel to it. Obviously it's very similar concept, you know what I mean? Like kids writing in, but even like that, like kids might really wholeheartedly want to know something about a hero, but with a villain it's more of like this curiosity, like why, you know, like how, you know, like and so that tone is different too. It's like in this sense, like the guarded ones in a sense are almost like the kids, you know, they're just like they're approaching these caged animals kind of, you know, like, why are they so bad? Why did, you know, how do you get away with it? Why do you do it? And so it's got to be a very similar book, just in terms of this very similar idea behind it, but a very different sort of vibe and energy. And Gustavo's already told me that, you know, kind of in his heart, the villains are his favorite. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does with these characters.
So how does that, like, what's the timeline work for that, as far as, okay, we've got this concept, we know what we're going to do, obviously you've got to sit down and write it, and then he's got to create the artwork. What kind of time span are we looking at for a graphic novel like this, from concept to completed product?
You know, like a good year. But I mean, you know, part of that is the planning stages and stuff. Like, so I'm handing in, I just did the revisions on the first section. We're doing it basically in little sections. And the reason for that is then we can get those like first 30 pages or so, get them written, get them revised, and get them off to Gustavo, you know, who then is going to turn around pencil sketches, and we'll take a look at those. And then eventually, so he can be working on the pencils and then even the inks while I'm writing the next section. So, you know, it's just like with comic books, you know, like they put these, you know, they've got the system down, but obviously for a graphic novel, it's a bigger endeavor. And we have a little bit of luxury of more time, you know, so I might have, you know, like between writing and revising, like a third or a fourth of the script. I might have a couple months for that. And then as I'm moving on to the next one, then Gustavo's doing his part. And then we're starting to see pages, by the time I'm handing in that next section. So I'll finish before he does. But we're pretty much, except at the very start, working simultaneously. Pretty streamlined system that they came up with for having these bi-weekly comics or whatever like that. And we are definitely not bi-weekly. I will tell you that. But it's pretty streamlined. So I mean, the meat of it is like we're going to do in like 6 months, and then months after that we're still fiddling with it a little. We're still like sort of like tweaking it, making changes, then, obviously the art and the lettering is a whole nother thing that's happening in those passes, and those are after Gustavo. So it's like me and then Gustavo, and now the colors, the lettering. And so these passes are happening, and I'll be done with the writing of the script, but then we're making changes, we're tweaking the sound effects, things like that. The sound effects we tweak when we see the pages, because the thing that makes sense in your head when you're, writing it may not work exactly with that picture, and so yeah, it's a process that, it'll take months, 6 months, but then like 6 months later, we're not done. We're just moving on to the next phase where we're tweaking things and making things good. And there's honestly more of that with a graphic novel than there is with comic books, is we have more time, so like, the lettering, the colors, everything in Dear Justice League is so amazing to me. And it's just a good team, and it's not like we worked slowly, but we took the time we needed. And because the idea is it's like it's going to be on shelves for a lot more than 2 weeks. You know what I mean? Like 2 weeks later, there's not another Dear Justice League coming. So we want to get it right, but it's a pretty streamlined process. Yeah.
Now that you've dipped your toe, and I'm not going to. Well, dipped your toe doesn't sound like enough of a phrase, because you're really diving headfirst into this. But now that you've got the foot in the door with DC Comics characters, is it something that you'd like to explore more of down the line after the supervillains? Yeah,
I mean, I've got some ideas, and so it's not obviously not 100% just up to me, but there are things that there's obviously specific characters that I'm into, but also just like, I know, just generally speaking, like Gustavo, he likes monsters, he likes animals. I like these things, you know what I mean? It seems like there's something we could do. Like, I would love to do something animal focused, you know what I mean? Like, obviously there's super pets, but I have other ideas that aren't exactly that, but are in that realm. And he, like his things, he has a specific taste in villains, and they tend towards the monstrous. And I do think that would be something fun also, to sort of like showcase some of those, there's more monstrous villains. And of course he did a Bizarro mini, kind of so I've definitely got some ideas, some just favorite characters from that just personal favorites of mine, but also just some ideas, some general categories, and it would be fun to do something like Dear Justice League, where the framing isn't just straight up an action adventure save the world type of thing, where there's another some other a way to get at this story. Because the idea with these books is to introduce these characters to new readers, and part of that is that these are readers who will be open to new kinds of ways of telling a superhero story, where it's not just beginning with the alarms going off and okay, what's the and then ending with the big battle. Nothing wrong with ending with a big battle, but but other ways of framing it, other ways to get at these characters would be fun. So I'm like, I've got some ideas for that, lots of ideas. We'll see what they have to say about that. But yeah.
Great. Now, just to finish up, we recently were running a poll on our website about Dear Justice League and whether fans would be interested in reading it, and a lot of them either aren't aware of it or think that it might not be necessarily for them. So to those people who, Superman fans, DC Comics fans, who maybe are of an older generation, who may either might not be on their radar or may think that it's not for them, what would you say to those kind of fans who, about this book?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, when we wrote an all ages book, all ages for comic book fans generally means a kid's comic, but we took that very seriously. And this is a book that, the guiding principle was us having fun with these characters. Like, I had a blast writing it, and really, we were allowed to indulge that with the silly, effects bursts and all of these things. And Gustavo had a blast drawing it, and I think it comes through, and we are not kids, we are two grown men having a blast with these iconic characters. And I think that's something that everyone can appreciate. I mean, you could say as an older reader, the heroes might seem a little bit retro, but there's also a little bit of irreverence in there that I think maybe adults will pick up on more than kids will. But it's still just a fun book about iconic heroes, and to me, that's for everyone.
Yeah,
kid, teen, adult. Yeah,
Fantastic. Well, Michael Northrop, thank you so much for joining us here on SupermanHomepage.com. I thoroughly enjoyed reading Dear Justice League. Cannot wait for Dear Supervillains when that comes out in about a year's time. Thanks for joining us here on Superman Homepage and taking the time out to speak to us.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Michael, and best of luck, and maybe we'll do this again in about a year's time.
It sounds good. I was just about to say good night to you, but I think it's morning there, right?
That's right, 9:30 a.m. on a Friday here, so I appreciate being able to sync it up, the time differences.
Yeah, it's like 7:30 p.m. here, so good night, good morning, whichever is appropriate.
Thanks again, Michael. All the best.